Oh, hello, yeah. Well, it's bank holiday, hooray. Yes, brill, isn't it? Yeah. Unless you're a 0 hours contract worker, in which case, no, you don't get paid, do you? That's not so good, is it? No. Still, workforce flexibility. That's great, isn't it? Whenever are we going to get capital flexibility? That's what I want to know. And the answer is you're not. No. Crushed by the wheels of industry. Woo woo. Anyway, today I thought we'd talk about those brilliant things that we're presented by in the media. Yes, particularly opinion polls. They do like to put a particular spin on opinion polls because it's a bit hard to sort of put a particular spin on opinion polls when you know what to look for. But people like Matt Goodwin hope that you don't. So let's look at Matt Goodwin from a couple of days ago. Him. Keir Starmer's personal approval rating tonight is minus 41. He remains one of the most unpopular prime ministers since records began. Yes, which presumably is, that probably goes back to our very earliest sort of cruciform writing or something. But, I'm an old enough person to remember that various other prime ministers were extremely unpopular. Some of them weren't Keir Starmer, but that's just me being picky and knowing things and having a memory and not being particularly pliable to, the Mr. Goodwins of the world. But I thought it was worthwhile just doing a bit of a dive in to these particular numbers because when we think generally about what people are thinking about, we often find that the stuff that goes into the media is only very, 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 very carefully cherry-picked. So we all know that Labour Party's very unpopular. We all know that Keir Starmer's unpopular. Good, yeah. I mean, we've got from Compass here, we've got more than 8 in 10 Labour members support the end of the two-child benefit cap. Yeah, indeed. And Labour Party members basically want left-wing things. Drum roll, even the ones that are left, because even the ones that are left are, broadly speaking, reasonably left-wing. Not particularly, obviously, compared to me, but broadly. A total disconnect between the membership and the party, which will lead to all sorts of hilarious problems because, of course, the membership will vote on things and then the party will have to find all those reasons why they're not going to do it, which is just as good as that nice Mr. Farage and his particular PLC, and indeed the rest of them. Yeah? Don't really want the people deciding things. That would be stupid, wouldn't it? A sort of democratic thing. Can't have that. But I thought it was worthwhile today just doing a sort of deeper dive into some of those other sort of numbers because the latest YouGov poll does indeed point to various people being pretty unfavourable. I mean, just to sort of present you with this, yes, I'll go into a bit more detail with it. Hang on a second. Right, okay, so generally speaking, if we're talking about the favourability of parties, and this is from about a week ago, then we end up with a view of the Labour Party, which is generally speaking on minus 37. Yes, they're in government and they are pretty unpopular. They're less popular than they were, and that might well continue. If the Labour Party can manage to get especially things like waiting lists and GP appointments down, then I think people will start to see light at the end of the tunnel, despite what our glorious media are saying. But it's worthwhile just having a closer look at some of these numbers in and around particularly young people, because that's what I'm really interested in. So the Labour Party's net unfavourability amongst young people is minus 25. Yeah, and it soars a bit after that in terms of our different age groups. But the Conservative Party, which Matt doesn't really want to talk about here, their net favourability is lower than the Labour Party, still a year out, despite Mr. Jenrick and everything, at minus 39. Again, slightly less unfavourable than they were, but nevertheless. But when we look at young people, we find that they are grossly still unfavoured, unfortunately, at minus 57. Okay, Reform, we're always told by Matt that Reform are really, really, really popular amongst everybody, everywhere, all of the time, everything, and another word that begins with every that I can't be bothered to think about. So their net favourability this August is minus 24, which, let's face it, isn't exactly brilliant for a party on the up or something. And again, if we look at those 18 to 24s, it's minus 54. In other words, amongst young people, Reform is twice as unpopular as the Labour Party is. Which Matt, oddly, for reasons we'll come on to inevitably, doesn't want to talk about. Whereas if we look at the Green Party, boo hiss, oh dear God, they've only got a handful of MPs, it's no wonder, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, indeed. So let's look at the Green Party. Their net favourability is +5. Which no one in the British media is talking about, or hardly anyone in the British media across the board is talking about. Same number of MPs as Reform, broadly speaking, and yet zero coverage, which might account for the reason why they're popular. But when we look at our 18 to 24, their favourability is 49. Now, I would have thought that was news. Obviously not to Matt, because he's not in the business of news. Again, come on to that. But there we go. When we look at, individual leaders, we do get a -44 for Keir Starmer. But Kemi Badenoch, let's have a look at that. That's -35. Oh dear. Yeah, not as bad as Keir, granted, but it's not very good for the leader of the opposition. And let's look at that Nigel, very popular, Nigel Farage, -31. And again, let's just do, our 18 to 24. So the so Keir Starmer's on -46 amongst young people, as you might expect, because they're not daft. Yeah. Kemi Badenoch is -44, not far behind, and drumroll, here's Nigel Farage with -59. Now, I personally would have thought that would have been, a bit more sort of newsworthy. But of course it isn't. And the reason it isn't is because, of the innate biases inside our media machine. Because these people, like Matt and some of the others, or a lot of the others, are just not interested in anything that doesn't fit their particular propaganda narrative. And I'm getting a bit bored with it, as I hope you are. I think a lot more of us should scream blue murder, particularly on social media, about this. After all, it's free speech, and those free speech champions that we see so much of, like Lord Young's boy Lord Young, would obviously be very keen about that. But of course they're not, because that means then that they can't control things. And the level of control is really quite astounding, because imagine you had a situation, right, okay, bearing in mind the Green Party are very popular, whereby Sky News had Caroline Lucas as one of its news presenters, and she decided to interview Zach, who's basically in the running to be the leader, and decided that in order to provide a bit of balance, what they'd do is they'd have a commentator from the Green Party's think tank, Green R Us. Yeah, I know I've just made that up because they don't basically have any. But think about that, and about how people would scream about how awful it was that the Sky News lefty gits that they are were doing it. Or imagine if The Guardian decided to do an in-depth interview with a similar grouping of people, whereby, they had an interview with Keir Starmer by Tony Blair, and as a bit of, just as a bit of balance, they get that nice Mr. Ashworth from the Resolution Foundation to chip in. Again, people would go, well, this is The Guardian voice, it's typical, it's dreadful, isn't it? Why is it allowed? Well, the reason why it's allowed, a la GB News and Matt Goodwin, who basically is a news presenter for some reason, but also a pollster who basically asks questions like, just how much do you love Nigel Farage? Hint, hint, I'm not really going to give you many options to say otherwise, and is also invited along as a cheerleader to Reform Party dues. Yeah? The only time Matt gets animated is is when he has to go up against people that don't agree with him. There's a very classic interview he gave with Ben Habib from a few months ago, whereby he doesn't allow Ben Habib to have a word in edgeways, because that's the most dangerous thing you can do with Ben Habib, isn't it? Because we mustn't let people speak. It's a free speech issue. Yeah, can't have anything that doesn't fit the narrative. Even another person who's basically more right-wing than Nigel Farage is at the present time. Yeah, it's fine to have Rupert Lowe on. It's basically okay-ish, unless you're Matt, to have Ben Habib on. But we can't possibly realistically have other voices. It's astounding. Now, Ofcom bizarrely allows this. And whenever I see right-wingers complaining about Ofcom, I just think I wouldn't make too much fuss about it, because it really wouldn't take much for a different government to come in, and no, I don't mean reform, and basically sweep the lot away. Because all you need to do is simply make Ofcom and, for example, some form of proper press regulator into something that had teeth. Actually fine GB News, say, £1 million each time they do stupid things like what they do, and they would decide to do things differently. Because Paul Marshall, whilst he's happy to, game the system and lose quite a lot of money, wouldn't want to lose that extra £1 million a month on top of what he already does do. Yeah? That is what I think we need to do. And a hung parliament, which is what we are very likely to head to, despite what Matt wants, is likely to give us something like that. And as ever in the UK, one of the things I sometimes do with my students is I say to them, try and imagine a world, for example, where women really were equal. Try and imagine a world whereby, for example, we actually had a moral foreign policy. And you can't, because you can't imagine what that would be like. But we get an inkling of what a proper regulator in and around our broadcast and indeed legacy media might do. It would mean that they can't do this kind of soporific rubbish anymore. Anyway, do have a lovely bank holiday. And remember, if you're out of pocket, it's probably capitalism. Enjoy.